A wake-up call at the doctor's office. Every family has that one moment when health stops being an abstract concept and becomes a sharp reality. For my father, it happened in the quiet, sterile office of his long-time physician. He was 72, a man who had always prided himself on being tough, independent, and, if you asked him, too busy to worry about blood pressure cuffs or lab results. That day, however, the numbers told a story he could no longer ignore. His reading flashed on the monitor, 156/95. The doctor leaned back, frowned, and said words that still echo in my memory. "You are well into the danger zone. If this continues, you're at serious risk for a stroke or heart attack." My father chuckled at first, brushing it off with the kind of bravado common among men of his generation. He had, after all, survived decades of hard work, long nights, and stress that would have flattened younger men. But beneath his laugh, I could see the flicker of concern. He knew something had to change. The truth is, high blood pressure rarely announces itself with pain or warning. It creeps silently, building over years, fueled by salty meals, sedentary habits, and the natural wear of aging arteries. The American Heart Association calls it the silent killer, for good reason. Millions of older adults walk around every day with elevated numbers, never realizing they are one stressful afternoon away from catastrophe. For our family, the doctor's warning was more than a statistic. It was a wake-up call. We could picture the aftermath of a stroke, confusion, loss of independence, perhaps even the nursing home he always dreaded. None of us wanted that future for him. That moment, uncomfortable as it was, became the turning point. It was the day we stopped believing that medication alone would fix everything. It was the day we began searching for a simple, sustainable path forward. Neither he nor I realized then that the solution would be found not in a pill bottle, but in something as ordinary as a short daily walk. 2. The weight of small habits. If you had asked my father back then about his lifestyle, he would have shrugged and said, "I'm doing just fine." He believed that because he wasn't bedridden, because he could still mow the lawn and drive to the diner on Sundays, he was healthy enough. That attitude, I've learned, is common among older men, measuring wellness by the absence of crisis rather than the presence of vitality. But health isn't built in emergencies. It's forged in the little choices we make each day. My father's days were shaped by convenience. Breakfast meant bacon and eggs, heavy with salt. Lunch was often a sandwich piled high with cold cuts, washed down with a soda. Afternoons found him in his recliner, flipping channels, while evenings ended with another round of salty snacks and television reruns. To him, these were harmless pleasures, the rewards of a long life of hard work. What he didn't see was the cumulative toll. The sodium added up. The inactivity slowly stiffened his arteries. Each skipped walk, each extra handful of chips was like laying one more brick in a wall that would eventually block the steady flow of life through his veins. The scare at the doctor's office should have been enough, but old habits cling like ivy. When I urged him to change, his answer was almost always the same. "That's what the pills are for, right?" It was easier to lean on medication than to imagine reshaping his daily routine. Then came the afternoon that shook him. He had driven to the grocery store, only to find himself lightheaded and unsteady as he pushed the cart. He had to stop twice just to catch his breath. The look on his face when he got home told me everything. Fear had finally crept past his defenses. That brief spell of dizziness was not just a symptom, it was a warning. It forced him to confront what he had long denied. The way he was living wasn't sustainable. Medication could manage numbers, but it couldn't give him back his strength, his energy, or his independence. 3. A friend's simple advice. Sometimes the most profound changes in life come from the simplest conversations. For my father, it happened one crisp morning at the local coffee shop, where he met his old friend Harold. They had known each other for decades. Two men cut from the same cloth, retired, stubborn, and convinced they had already figured out life's great mysteries. But that morning Harold looked different, leaner, more energetic, his eyes brighter than I had seen in years. My father noticed it right away and asked, half jokingly, "What's your secret? New doctor? Miracle pill?" Harold chuckled and shook his head. "No secret, no magic. I just started walking. 15 minutes every morning. That's it." At first, my father dismissed the idea. Walking seemed trivial, almost laughable. After all, hadn't he spent his youth working 12-hour days on his feet? To him, walking was hardly exercise. It was something you did when the car was parked too far from the store entrance. But Harold leaned across the table and spoke with quiet conviction. "You'd be surprised, Joe. My blood pressure's down. I sleep better. I feel lighter on my feet. 15 minutes isn't much, but it adds up." That conversation stayed with my father longer than he cared to admit. He would never say it aloud, but seeing Harold's transformation stirred something in him, maybe a mix of envy and hope. If his old friend could change course so late in life, maybe he could too. Still, the resistance was there. "My legs aren't what they used to be," he complained when I suggested we try it together. "And besides, the weather's too unpredictable." Excuses came easily, as they often do when we are afraid of failure. Then came another blood pressure reading, higher than the one before. This time, even he couldn't deny the truth. With Harold's words echoing in his ears, he finally muttered the smallest concession. "Maybe I'll give it a try." And that was the crack in the wall, a single opening where hope could slip through. 4. The first step. The morning my father finally agreed to try walking was grey and cool, the kind of weather that makes a man reconsider leaving the comfort of his recliner. He sat by the window, eyeing the sky as if it might deliver him an excuse, but for once, the excuses ran out. He sighed, laced up a pair of old sneakers, and shuffled to the door. I still remember the way he hesitated on the porch, gripping the railing like it was a lifeline. The sidewalk stretched out before him, familiar yet strangely daunting. For a man who had built houses with his bare hands, the idea of a short walk had somehow become a mountain. We took it slow. Each step was deliberate, cautious. His breath came heavier than expected, his stride shorter than he liked. After just a block, he muttered, "Feels like I've run a mile." I could hear the frustration in his voice, the pride stung by reality. But then something shifted. A neighbor waved. A dog barked playfully from behind a fence. The rhythm of his steps began to settle. By the time we looped back toward home, barely 10 minutes later, his cheeks were flushed, his eyes a little brighter. "That wasn't so bad," he admitted, though he tried to hide it behind a grumble. For me, it was a small victory. For him, it was the start of something far greater than either of us could see. The truth is, the first step is never about the walk itself. It's about the decision, the courage to move when staying still feels easier. That morning, my father chose movement over inertia, action over resignation. And while the change was small, it cracked open the door to possibility. Sometimes, that's all it takes. 5. The rhythm of the walk. It's funny how quickly something unfamiliar can begin to feel natural. Within a week, my father had already settled into a routine. Every morning, just after his first cup of coffee, he would put on those worn sneakers and step outside. No grand announcement, no fanfare, just the quiet resolve of a man testing his own limits. At first, the walks were still short, a block here, 2 blocks there. But soon he found his rhythm. The shuffle turned into a steady pace. His breathing, once ragged, began to smooth out. Even his posture changed. The stoop of hesitation gave way to the upright stance of someone reclaiming lost ground. Neighbors began to notice. "Joe, you're out early today," one remarked. Another gave him a thumbs up as he passed. Those small acknowledgments mattered more than he let on. They turned a lonely task into a shared victory, a reminder that change is rarely invisible. One morning, halfway through his usual route, he surprised me. He stopped, looked around, and said, "Let's go a little farther today." It wasn't much, an extra block, maybe 2, but in that moment I saw something remarkable. The walk was no longer a chore. It was becoming a choice. And with that choice came a subtle transformation. His complaints grew fewer, his step grew lighter. He began noticing things he had overlooked for years, the flowers blooming along the sidewalk, the crisp air filling his lungs, even the sound of birds overhead. What began as exercise was slowly turning into a kind of medicine, not just for his body, but for his spirit. The rhythm of walking, steady and unhurried, had begun to heal more than blood pressure. It was restoring his sense of control, his dignity, his belief that he still had the power to shape his own health. In life, we often look for complicated solutions to simple problems. My father was learning the opposite. Sometimes the simplest rhythm, a few steady steps each day, is exactly what brings the greatest change. 6. The scare that changed everything. Progress can be a fragile thing. Just when you begin to feel steady, life has a way of testing your resolve. For my father, that test came one Saturday morning, 2 months into his walking routine. He had been doing well, stronger, more energetic, even proud of his growing stamina. But on that particular morning, he returned from his walk, pale and quiet. He lowered himself into his chair, clutching the armrest as though steadying the room. "Just a little dizzy," he muttered, brushing away my concern, but the color drained from his face and his breathing was shallow. I didn't wait. I drove him straight to the clinic. The doctor's words were blunt. "Your blood pressure is still dangerously high. These walks are helping, but you need to take this seriously. You can't afford to stop now." For the first time, my father's bravado cracked. He stared at the floor, silent, absorbing the weight of his condition. This wasn't just about getting tired on a walk. It was about whether he'd be around to see his grandchildren grow up, whether he'd keep his independence or surrender it piece by piece. On the ride home, the air in the car was heavy. Finally, he spoke, voice low but firm. "I don't want this to be the end of me. If 15 minutes can keep me here longer, then I'll do it." It was a scare, yes, but also a turning point. The walks were no longer an experiment or a casual effort. They became his lifeline, a daily promise to himself and to the people who loved him. Sometimes it takes a jolt, a sudden reminder of our mortality, to ignite real change. That morning, my father's journey shifted from reluctant compliance to determined commitment. And though fear sparked it, hope would carry it forward. 7. Signs of transformation. The weeks following my father's health scare revealed a different man. Not overnight, not with fanfare, but through a series of small, undeniable changes. The first sign was his energy. He no longer collapsed into his recliner after breakfast. Instead, he rose with purpose, lacing his sneakers almost before the coffee had cooled. Walking had shifted from a chore to a ritual as natural as brushing his teeth. Then came the numbers. At his next checkup, the nurse wrapped the cuff around his arm, and for the first time in years, the reading dipped noticeably lower. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. The doctor smiled and said, "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." Those words lit a spark in him brighter than any prescription. Even his appearance changed. His face carried more color, his step more confidence. He joked more, grumbled less. Neighbors commented on how spry he looked, and though he brushed off the compliments, I could see the pride flicker in his eyes. But the most remarkable transformation was not physical, it was emotional. My father, once resigned to decline, began to dream again. He spoke of planting a small garden in the spring. He dusted off his fishing gear. He even entertained the idea of taking his grandchildren to the park, something that had once felt out of reach. It was as if those 15-minute walks had opened a door to a life he thought was closed forever. The routine built strength in his legs, yes, but it also rebuilt strength in his spirit. Each step carried him farther away from despair and closer to hope. This is the quiet miracle of change in later years. Not that it erases time, but that it gives us back pieces of life we thought we had lost. My father was learning step by step that health is not just about living longer, it's about living better. 8. The gift of 15 minutes. Looking back now, I realize my father's transformation wasn't about walking at all. It was about reclaiming a part of himself he thought he had lost. The man who once sat in silence, resigned to his declining health, had found new life in something as simple as 15 minutes each day. The walks gave him more than lower blood pressure. They gave him laughter at the dinner table, sharper memories of old stories, and the joy of chasing his grandchildren across the yard. They gave him dignity, the quiet assurance that he was not merely surviving, but living. I often think about the first day, when he could barely make it around the block, the look of frustration on his face, the heaviness in his breath. And then I remember the day, months later, when he turned to me with a grin and said, "Let's go another mile." The contrast still brings tears to my eyes. His story is not unique. It is the story of countless men and women who believe it's too late to change, too late to take back control, but the truth is this: it is never too late. The body and the spirit are remarkably resilient, waiting only for us to give them the chance. 15 minutes, that's all it took. Not a gym membership, not expensive equipment, not a complicated regimen, just the willingness to lace up shoes, step outside, and begin. My father's journey taught me something I carry with me every day. Health is not a grand gesture. It's a collection of small, steady choices that, over time, build into something extraordinary. So if you find yourself hesitating, wondering whether change is possible, I offer you his story as proof. Take the walk, take the first step, and let those 15 minutes open the door to the life you still deserve.